A critical hearing that will feature the top intelligence leaders in Washington. They will brief Congress on the threats facing America's national security, but expect a lot of questions today to center around Russia and center around the dossier, as we're learning about a rather unusual email sent by former National Security Advisor Susan Rice on Donald Trump's inauguration day. So what is that all about? Busy Tuesday. I'm Bill Hemmer. Welcome to America's Newsroom today. Welcome.
Busy couple hours coming up. Good morning, Bill. I'm Sandra Smith. So here's who will be on deck today. FBI Director Christopher Wray, CIA Director Mike Pompeo, NSA Director Mike Rogers, and DNI Director Dan Coats. But the hearing comes as we are now learning about an email sent by Susan Rice to herself describing a meeting where she says President Obama urged his team to conduct the Russia election meddling investigation, quote, by the book. That email raising some serious questions for two Republican senators, and here's one of them.
What I'm worried about is it's an effort by the president to basically get himself on the record through Susan Rice to make sure that from his point of view, everything was done by the book. The question is, did the president know anything about the FISA warrant application? Did Susan Rice know that the warrant application included a dossier from Mr. Steele when he was on the payroll of the Democratic Party?
So now Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Harris, she is at her post today inside that hearing room on Capitol Hill. And Catherine, let's start with you and that hearing today. Good morning.
Well, thank you, Bill. This is one of the biggest hearings of the year for the U.S. intelligence community. It brings together the leadership of 6 different agencies to testify publicly and to help Congress set the budget priorities. So we're talking about al-Qaeda. We're talking about ISIS. We're also talking about something called the gray zone. This is the battle space between peace and conventional warfare. It's where bad actors go to play to level the playing field against the United States if they cannot compete militarily or economically. So think like actors such as North Korea, China, and Russia, and the use of cyber technology. The other thing to be watching for today is that this committee hopes to make public its initial findings on the Russia investigation sometime in the next month, specifically looking at Russia's interference in the 2016 election. So think to things like the theft of the DNC and the Podesta emails, how they were dispersed, the use of bots. What it will not be looking at is the allegations of collusion between the Trump campaign and Russian officials, Bill.
What about the timing in this letter, then, Catherine, from Senators Graham and Grassley that we've
Well, it's really worth taking a look at the email itself. As you can see, parts of it are heavily redacted, but it codifies or memorializes a meeting in early January of 2017, around the 5th, where you had the FBI director at the time, Director James Comey, also the Deputy Attorney General Sally Yates, then National Security Advisor Susan Rice, and the President of the United States, Barack Obama. And it appears to be an effort to codify the idea that the instructions from the president to law enforcement was to do things by the book. But this leaves open the door, according to a former government official, as to whether the national security apparatus took a slightly different approach, because there is a reference, according to the two senators, to the need to maybe withhold information from the Trump transition team that they thought was sensitive because of Russia. The bottom line is that Susan Rice is being given until the 3rd week of this month to respond, and we should learn a lot more then, Bill.
I think it'd be very interesting to see how far these leaders go on their answers today. We'll be watching. Thank you, Catherine Harris,
You're
live
welcome.
inside that room in Washington.
Meanwhile, another big story this morning, the Senate expected to open the debate on the GOP's latest immigration proposal, which would allow a path to citizenship for 1.8 million Dreamers in return for funding for the border wall. Republicans claiming this offer has the best chance to pass in the Senate. The president weighing in on Twitter this morning, saying negotiations on DACA have begun. Republicans want to make a deal, and Democrats say they want to make a deal. Wouldn't it be great if we could finally, after so many years, solve the DACA puzzle? This will be our last chance. There will never be another opportunity. March 5th. Chief White House correspondent John Roberts is live from the North Lawn. The president obviously referencing the deadline coming up to fix the DACA situation. John?
Yeah, and that one's coming up fast, too. It's sort of like the ground rush when you're jumping out of an airplane. You seem to float for a long time, and then all of a sudden, whoops, here comes the ground. And that's the way it is. Just 21 days to go now before protections for DACA-eligible illegal immigrants run out. The president wants a deal on DACA, mostly because he wants a deal on immigration reform, willing to trade a path to citizenship for 1.8 million people in exchange exchange for extra border security, including a wall, as well as an end to chain migration and an end to the visa lottery program. Yesterday, meeting with state governors and local officials on infrastructure, the president said to Democrats, I want to make a deal. What do you want to do? Listen here.
I hope the Democrats are not going to use it just as a campaign. You know, they've been talking about DACA for many years, and they haven't produced. We started talking about DACA, and I think we'll produce. But if the Democrats want to make a deal, it's really up to them. We would love to do DACA. We would love to get it done. We want border security and the other elements that you know about, chain migration you know about, the visa lottery you know about. We think there's a good chance of getting DACA done if the Democrats are serious and they actually want to do it.
Now, Democrats have been balking at making a deal. What they would like to do is trade a deal on DACA for border security, then leave the issues of chain migration and visa lottery for later. But Republicans and the White House fear later would mean never. Arkansas Senator Tom Cotton fired a warning shot across the bow of Democrats on that front. Listen here.
The president's framework is not an opening bid in negotiations. It is a best and final offer. He has taken parts of many other proposals, put them together. We've taken that framework and turned it into legislative text.
The White House expects a series of votes on DACA beginning in the Senate this week. They expect that will continue over the next couple of weeks. And Sandra, the plan is for the White House to have their plan be the last one standing when all of these votes are done. Sandra?
John, what's the response the White House has been offering in regards to Rob Porter, who exited the White House last week?
Well, they haven't really done much more to illuminate the whole timeline of this, insisting that they first learned about it last week. And we know that's not the case because we talked to Colby Holderness, who is Rob Porter's first ex-wife. She told us that she told the FBI all about the allegations about spousal abuse, domestic abuse, and gave them the pictures of her with the black eye on January 25th of last year, more than a year ago. Two sources tell Fox News that the FBI made the White House counsel's office aware in early November of the allegations, and we know that Porter talked to the White House counsel Don McGahn about the allegations later in November, but again, the White House insisting the full picture didn't become clear to them until last week. Listen here.
Look, we learned of the extent of the situation involving Rob Porter last Tuesday evening, and within 24 hours, his resignation had been accepted and announced.
The White House was also grilled yesterday about why the president has personally and publicly offered support for Porter, reminding reporters on Friday that Porter says that he is innocent, then sending a tweet out on Saturday asking what happened to due process. But while the president has done that personally and publicly, he's left it to staff or surrogates to express his condemnation of domestic violence. Listen here.
Why hasn't he said that? He had the opportunity.
It's my job to speak on behalf of the president. I spoke to him, and he relayed that message directly to me, and I'm relaying it directly to you.
Now, we likely, Sandra, are not going to hear any more level of detail from the White House about this. It seems the strategy is going to be to just take a beating and hope that at some point everybody moves on.
We'll keep watching it. John Roberts at the White House. Thank you.
Well, with more on all this now, Jonathan Swan, national political reporter for Axios. Don't know if they're going to take a beating continuously, Jonathan, but we watched this briefing yesterday. 80% of the questions were all about Rob Porter on a day when the White House put out a wish list for a $4 trillion budget. So how does the White House put the Porter issue behind it or just take the beating, as John Roberts explains there?
Well, the problem is they haven't explained how, I mean, you just laid it out perfectly in that segment there. I mean, the FBI knew about this in January of last year. I was talking to one person, one former White House official, Republican, who's been heavily involved in these processes. He said if the FBI is good at one thing, it's covering their posterior. So the idea that the FBI didn't tell anybody in the White House counsel's office about this for a very senior staffer who was a high priority for a security clearance, it's actually impossible to fathom that nobody in that White House counsel's office knew about it until November, when we're told that John Kelly was informed partially about these issues. So, I mean, they haven't actually said who knew what and when, and so reporters are naturally curious people. They're going to keep investigating on that.
Okay, another matter here. Susan Rice, the memo. What's being said at the White House about this? How are we to piece this together from Inauguration Day?
Well, it is a curious email because if what we're told is correct, which is that she is writing about a meeting that happened on January 5 last year. Why does she wait 15 days until Inauguration Day, January 20, to write this email to herself, which anybody who knows anything about how senior officials in government think and work knows that she is writing this email not for herself but for the public record. You don't send an email laying something like that out unless you ultimately want it to be, you know, the official version of events from the Obama administration. So it does seem to be Susan Rice on Inauguration Day, knowing she's about to be out the building, wanting to put her version of events on the record.
It certainly is intriguing. I don't know where it leads us in the end. How did they get this email? What investigation did that come from?
I mean, I don't know exactly, but it's Grassley and Graham. I don't know exactly how, what part of the oversight that came from.
Okay, Jonathan Swan, thank you so much. Good to have you back on our program today. From Axios, they were in Washington, D.C. Thank you. 11 minutes past the hour here, so we'll see where that story goes. Right now, it's intriguing to be dropped in there and see, wow, I mean, the chain of events right there, 15 days before you're leaving after 8 years in the White House on Inauguration Day. So.
And the White House making the same point about the timing of all of this morning, so a lot more questions there. We'll have a lot more on this coming up. Meanwhile, as we mentioned, minutes away now from that big hearing on the worldwide threats facing the United States today. The North Korean threat expected to be a big topic at those hearings this morning, as Vice President Mike Pence says the U.S. is now open to possible talks with the North under the right conditions. Former UN Ambassador John Bolton will join us live next.
Also, Sandra, U.S. defense officials saying the fight against ISIS entering a whole new phase. What does that mean? What does it entail? We'll tell you about that coming up. Plus, there's this today.
Oh, we're building the wall. Believe me, we're building the wall. Don't even think about it. Somebody said the other day, well, he really didn't want to build the wall. He was just using that. We're building the wall.
President Trump's new border wall now one step closer to reality in the state of Texas, but it's already running into new controversy. Details in a live report in moments.
Moments away, big hearing on Capitol Hill. You get all the intelligence leaders in the same room, where we expect North Korea to be a big topic. That's one of the headlines now. But you've got all these questions about Russia that are certainly going to pop up too. John Bolton, former U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Fox News contributor, senior fellow, American Enterprise Institute. How you doing, sir? And welcome back here on America's
Good morning.
Newsroom. Mike Pence said this, Washington Post leaving South Korea. On screen, the following. So the maximum pressure campaign is going to continue and intensify, but if you want to talk, we'll talk. How big of a headline is that, do you think?
I don't think it's a big headline, but I think it reflects what the administration tried to do successfully with the Vice President's visit to South Korea, to show solidarity with South Korea and Japan against the North Korean nuclear program and their propaganda barrage at the Olympics, and also to make it clear that if talks are going to happen, it's not going to be because we've let up on the pressure or because we're going to make concessions based on talk back from the North Koreans. My personal view is there isn't anything to talk about, but we want to show we're with the South Koreans. They want to talk on the basis that the sanctions and the pressure and potential military action continue on the table. There's nothing lost by that.
So you don't think this is a suggestion in any sort of policy shift?
No, I think the Vice President reiterated several times publicly in Japan and South Korea that the increase in pressure was going to continue. I'm not optimistic that will stop North Korea either, but the fact is it's very important for the United States to stay publicly locked together with South Korea and Japan. And one of the purposes of the North Korean propaganda effort was to drive wedges between us. So the Vice President's job was prevent that from happening, and I think that was part of the strategy.
All right, yesterday we hear that Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump talked. Middle East peace. The Russians would side with the Palestinians and work on Abbas, and the Americans would side with Netanyahu and work on the Israelis. Is that a framework for something that could work?
Well, look, I think it's important the president speak with leaders like Putin, like Xi Jinping of China. There's a lot on their agenda. The Middle East is very important. The fact is Russia's in a de facto alliance with Iran, hostile to American interests almost across the board. We've got armed conflict going on there now. Americans have been in jeopardy, and we have reacted militarily just within the past weeks. Israel responded to an Iranian drone coming into its territory and responded against the Syrians.
A lot of activity there over the weekend. Quickly on this hearing now, Catherine Harrods tells us, you know, it's set up to talk about North Korea, the Middle East, but also Russia, China, ISIS, etc. But she says expect this hearing to be dominated by questions regarding the Russia probe, the dossier, the British spy, Christopher Steele, so we'll see where that conversation goes. You were listening to Jonathan Swan a moment ago when we were talking about Susan Rice and the email she sent herself on an inauguration day. Why do you find that so peculiar as we try and piece this together, not knowing?
You know, there's a saying at the State Department, nobody ever lost the battle of the memcons, the memoranda of conversation. So when you record for the file what happened in a particular meeting, you're putting down the version most advantageous to yourself. And the way Susan Rice's email reads, she says, the president says on law enforcement, by the book, I'm not interfering, I'm not asking you to do anything. But turning to national security issues, what's going on here? This shows that the potential, this whole thing about the president not interfering in law enforcement was just a charade. He asks all the questions under the guise of national security of Jim Comey and others that he wants. So I think this is going to be the source of endless questions.
You really think there's something there?
Well, look, if I were 15 minutes after the end of the Obama administration still in the White House, I'm not sure I would be typing emails to the file unless I had something pretty interesting in mind. Could you give her the benefit
of the doubt? I mean, is she working on setting the record straight for herself or in her own mind, or perhaps she's got a book in mind down the road?
Yeah, well, I know Newt suggested that, and that could well be. You know, as I said right at the end of the administration, proving herself right yet again, I'm inclined to say there's more there. I'd like to know what other midnight emails were being written that day.
All right, sir. Thank you very much. John Bolton, good to have you in today. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Bill.
You bet.
The illegal immigrant acquitted in the murder of San Francisco woman Kate Steinle is back in court today. We will tell you why and what we can expect from that. Plus, the president's daughter-in-law, Vanessa Trump, is released from the hospital after a suspicious letter is sent to her New York home. Now the couple is speaking out.
So Vanessa Trump now has been released from a New York City hospital. She was taken there as a precaution after opening a letter at home addressed to her husband, Don Jr., that contained some sort of white substance. Investigators say it turned out to be cornstarch, but that sent a lot of fright through that family. Don Jr. expressing disgust, tweeting, "Thankful that Vanessa and my children are safe and unharmed after the incredibly scary situation that occurred this morning. Truly disgusting that certain individuals choose to express their opposing views with such disturbing behavior." Vanessa Trump also on Twitter saying, "Thank you so much for all the help today in NYC. I appreciate all the quick response to make sure that I was safe. I thank you, FDNY, Secret Service, NYPD, and the New York FBI. The Secret Service now is investigating that incident. It's certainly scary for anyone.
Absolutely.
Much less the family connected to the White House. I mean, we all remember the anthrax scare.
Very scary thing, and she went to the hospital as a precaution. They didn't know what the substance was, and now we know. Glad everybody's okay. All right, well, building a big, beautiful wall has been one of Trump's biggest promises, and now companies are submitting bids to help build a portion of that border wall in South Texas. Casey Stiegel's live in Dallas with this story. Casey, how does the bidding for this work?
Well, Sandra, as you know, this process has first of all been playing out in other places like in California, but now the wheels are officially turning here in the Lone Star State. The bids are coming in, a contract set to be awarded in May. Now, we shot this drone video of the general site where this 3-mile portion of the wall would go. The terrain down in the Rio Grande Valley of South Texas is very dense in places, and the river is the international border. Also, it is home to the some 2,000-acre Santa Ana Wildlife Refuge. Part of the wall will cut through it, and environmental groups say it will devastate the ecosystem, largely why the federal government designated it as a national park in the first place.
It's basically sort of reneging on a promise that, Congress and the government made in 1943, that this was so valuable that it needed to be protected in perpetuity, and that they would now turn around and do something that would do such damage to it is beyond irony.
The total price tag for this particular contract, $25 to $100 million.
Wow.
Quite a
Casey,
range there.
and the government maintains this wall is necessary?
That's right. U.S. Customs and Border Protection tells us that this area we're talking about is one of the busiest trafficking routes in the whole sector. In fact, we experienced it ourselves down there doing live shots on the border a couple of weeks ago when we saw border agents race up and pull several people right from our camera position, the brush, illegal immigrants who had just crossed into the U.S. In a statement to Fox News, I'm quoting here, the federal government says CBP works diligently to integrate responsible environmental practices, including incorporating sustainable practices into all aspects of our decision-making and operations. So moving forward, for now, here is the plan, Sandra.
Casey Stiegel, thank you.
9:27, Washington, D.C. We are moments away from the start of that Senate Intel Hearing Committee on national security. We're hearing it'll be dominated by questions on the Russia matter, the British spy behind that unverified Trump dossier, and a lot more. So we'll take you there as soon as it begins on Capitol Hill.
We will indeed. Plus, brand new reaction from the White House after a pair of Republican senators demand answers about, quote, unusual activity by former National Security Advisor Susan Rice during her last day on the job.
Things start to unravel, and then one thing pulls another thing, and then one morning you're in a space you never dreamed of because they just keep unraveling. And I think Susan Rice's memo is one more example of this thing gradually unraveling.
Markets opening just a short time ago. Stocks taking a little bit of a breather, as you can notice this morning after the Dow surged more than 400 points to close the session yesterday. A volatile couple days. It's been a volatile couple weeks now for the stock market. Investors continue to be on edge over the potential for rising interest rates. A lot of folks watching the bond market, dropping yields there. Some investors running for cover. But it's amazing when you still look at this volatility and the Dow's still at 25,000.
The volatility went like this for about a year, didn't it? And now it's just all over the joint. So I guess it's going to stay, right?
Well, we will watch it.
Yes, we shall. 9:32 now. From New York to Washington, D.C., check this out. Top intel officials about to testify before a Senate hearing on the top threats to American security. It starts in a moment. This is said to be one of the more critical security hearings we will get all year. We understand the Russia matter, as well as the unverified anti-Trump dossier, could dominate questions today. We also hear about those dueling FISA memos. A lot of topics now. The FBI Director Christopher Wray is there. CIA Director Mike Pompeo. NSA Director Mike Rogers. DNI Director Dan Coates. All will take questions in a moment. So we'll take you to that hearing as soon as it gets underway. We've got a period of opening statements, and then we'll get into the meat of it. The question and the answer usually is where we can find most of our storylines. So stay tuned. We'll watch that live from the Hill coming up here on America's Newsroom.
Now to a Fox News alert on our other top story of the morning. A pair of top Republican senators wanting to question former National Security Advisor Susan Rice about an email she sent to herself on the day of President Trump's inauguration. The partially declassified email details a White House meeting involving President Obama on how to proceed with the Russia investigation. Senators Chuck Grassley and Lindsey Graham sending Rice a letter asking her to explain her, quote, unusual activities from her final moments as National Security Advisor. Here's Senator Graham last night on the story.
She's sending herself an email talking about a conversation on January the 5th with the president, reassuring herself and I guess the president that this would be done by the book. I think that's odd and disturbing because we know that the investigation regarding the Trump campaign was anything but by the book.
Joining me now are Josh Holmes, former Chief of Staff to Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, and Marie Harf, former State Department spokeswoman and a Fox News contributor. As you can see, by the way, as we go to our panel, witnesses are walking into the room of that Senate hearing that is about to get underway. We're going to continue watching this for you and any developments there. Meanwhile, I want to bring you in first, Josh, on this email that has been discovered. Written by Susan Rice on the president's inauguration day. What stands out here to you?
Well, I think if we knew nothing about Susan Rice, the email in and of itself wouldn't be all that concerning. You got to remember at that time, the White House knew that the incoming National Security Advisor, Michael Flynn, had been in contact with the Russians during the transition period and more importantly, had deceived his own administration about those contacts. And so it's not surprising that they would be concerned. The problem here is that Susan Rice has had a long and troubled history and relationship with the truth, and particularly with regards to anything that could be remotely considered by the book. And so when she says that she's doing something that's quote unquote by the book and makes a notation for it that quite literally is there to cover her and the president, in the event that this becomes a larger investigation, it's certainly worth looking at.
So, Marie, before I go to you, I just want to highlight what you're watching on the left-hand side of your screen here. This is the Senate Intelligence Committee. They're holding a Senate hearing on worldwide threats. As you can see, the witnesses have now taken their seats there. Present is DNI Director Dan Coats, CIA Director Mike Pompeo, NSA Director Mike Rogers, FBI Director Christopher Wray. They will each be testifying. They're obviously going to be taking opening statements from the chairman, Richard Burr, and ranking Democrat Mark Warner. We will be listening for this and bring you questions when they begin. Meanwhile, Marie, I want to bring you back in here. This email that was written by Susan Rice on Inauguration Day, what does it tell you?
Well, it doesn't tell me all that much that we wouldn't have assumed was happening. You know, it's not unusual at all, I assure you, for administration officials to make memos for the file, memos for the record. What I'm guessing happened here is it was the last day and she was making sure that everything was cataloged, everything was in order. She was probably cleaning out her office, I'm assuming. So, you know, actually, Josh has hit something pretty right in what he said. A lot of how you read this email, I think, is being determined by what people already think of Susan Rice. For those of us who worked with her, who trust her, who know her, this email looks totally normal, like something any administration officer would do.
Let's look at parts of it and her. And, you know, she reinforces that things were done by the book, and that's really what stands out to a lot of people, and I know to you too, Josh. She writes, quote, President Obama began the conversation by stressing his continued commitment to ensuring that every aspect of this issue is handled by the intelligence and law enforcement communities by the book. The president stressed that he is not asking about initiating or instructing anything from a law enforcement perspective. He reiterated that our law enforcement team needs to proceed as it normally would by the book. Says it twice, Josh.
Yeah, well, you know, there is no book for what they were talking about. And what's concerning to me about it, and I think the reason that the senators are asking more questions, is because we've been dealing with Susan Rice, a moving target of misinformation, going back to, you know, what the sources and methods were for finding warrants on Carter Page, for, you know, all the way back to Benghazi, for crying out loud. So, you know, if she was somebody that Republicans thought honest and trustworthy, I think that would be in a different category. But given her history here, I think it's certainly worth looking at. You
know, it certainly, if one were to give her the benefit of the doubt, as Newt Gingrich attempted to do earlier as well, while he does say this raises serious questions, you know, some people do write notes to themselves so they can remember for later on. But Marie, the White House responded to this earlier. Ross Shaw was on, White House Deputy Press Secretary, and for them, this does raise serious questions. Listen.
That email raises a lot of questions, but I can assure you that 5 minutes before you walk out the door of the White House on January 20th of 2017, you write an email about doing something by the book. It's pretty clear you didn't operate by the book.
Marie?
There's no evidence that anyone did anything wrong or inappropriate in this investigation. There have been a lot of accusations. I think a lot of those are totally inappropriate and unfounded. And of course, Raj Shah is going to say that. There are partisan politics at play here. That happens in Washington. But look, Susan Rice was saying that this was being done by the book. What else would we want our officials to do except for do things by the book? So we cannot assume that because some people don't like Susan or don't like things she did or said in the past, that this is any indication of any
but Josh,
wrongdoing.
isn't it fair that they just want answers? They're pointing out, the two senators are just saying, it strikes us odd that among your activities in the final moments, in the final day of the Obama administration, you would feel the need to send yourself such an unusual email purporting to document a conversation involving President Obama and other high-ranking officials. That's fair. Clarify what this was about, because it looks unusual to them.
But
it's not unusual, Josh.
Yeah, but look, we all know Susan Rice is a smart lady. She's extremely sophisticated. She knows darn well that everything that she's dealing with here could be interpreted as not by the book. And so when she gets into an email to herself, first of all, as you know, people do that. You know, we saw Jim Comey do it, and that's been a part of the public record, too. But when you do that, you're obviously trying to communicate something to somebody who would FOIA something like that for a public investigation. And when you're explicitly saying by the book, it should go unsaid that our government officials are doing things by the book.
Well, a lot of people, including those two senators and the White House, want answers. What does all this mean? We'll see. We'll see where it goes. Josh Holmes, Marie Hart, thank you.
So that hearing is underway as we await the question portion of that hearing. Another big story in the Hill today is the Republican immigration proposal that the GOP says is the only plan that can pass the Senate and be signed by the president.
I think if this bill, as written, passes to the Senate, then we can be confident it can pass the House and get the president's signature.
So Republicans call it the final offer on the table, the first and the final offer. Will this be a path to citizenship? Will Democrats play ball? Senator John Thune here to answer a lot of questions on that. Coming up next.
Plus, the Attorney General slamming MS-13 in a speech to America's sheriffs, what he's now calling for in the battle against the notorious gang.
They're by far the most violent gang. So let's crush this bunch. Let's show them they can't take over.